My name is Maryann Lombardi, and I am the Associate Director for the Creative Affairs Office here in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the Care for Creatives Community Conversation Series on mental health. Care for Creatives is a partnership between the D.C. Creative Affairs Office and the George Washington University, which provides pay-what-you-can mental health supports to any creative and entrepreneur in the D.C. area who needs it. You can find out more information about Care for Creatives and how to receive care on our website at creativeaffairsdc.com. So welcome. We are here to have a conversation with Dr. Alexis Moreno about relationships. So Dr. Alexis is a health coach, and she's also a community psychologist and the founder of Wit Reason. And I love this quote, Dr. Alexis, on your website, where you talk about how this organization is a mental health and consultation services because our mind is involved in everything we do. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and yourself, and welcome?
Thank you so much. Yes, I appreciate that you value that quote as much as I do, because I mean, really, I might be a little biased because it's my industry, but I think like a psychologist, or at the very least, some kind of mental health professional should be involved in everything that involves the human mind, whether that's you're trying to create products and services for other humans, or your whole organization has humans involved. There's going to be some need for some mental health professionals and relationship experts and talk about like dynamics. It gets very complex. So it's nice to have a professional on board to help with all those things.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, speaking of relationships, this might sound like an obvious question, but why are relationships so hard? And why is the health and stability of those relationships so important to our mental health?
Yeah, so in psychology, at least when we're talking about relationships, we're talking about all different types of relationships. So you could have a relationship with your neighbor, with your boss, or with a loved one. So across the board, relationships can be really challenging. I think a lot of it has to do with our background and upbringing, and the fact that we kind of assume that other people think and value the same things and same way that we do. And that tends to cause a lot of conflict because we have all of these unspoken kind of like expectations. And when other people don't meet those, it can cause that conflict. And one person's thinking one way and another person has a completely different perspective on the same situation. And so there's a lot of things that are unspoken, that are assumed, and trying to kind of weed through all of that to get everyone on the same page is a lot of fun, at least for us on our end.
Well, I can imagine that managing those mixed expectations or assumptions can cause maybe stress or anxiety or strain. What is the impact of those feelings on our mental health when those expectations or assumptions are out of whack with each other?
Oh man, it could be a number of things. A lot of what we're seeing, especially lately, is increases in like anxiety and in depression. Now, relationship challenges don't have to meet like diagnostic criteria or anything like that. It can just cause extreme distress or chronic stress, which has a toll both on our mental health and physical health. So trying to learn as early on in your life as possible how to navigate relationships in a really effective way could be beneficial just across the board and in every aspect of your life.
Yeah, I can imagine that being able to establish and communicate about your boundaries, would be a key piece of this. I was wondering if you could help us understand what exactly are boundaries, and how do we actually set them up and keep them intact, and why are they important?
Yeah, I love that boundaries is becoming more and more in the general language. The challenge with boundaries is that they can be really complex in figuring out, what's important to you and then how to communicate that to another person. So boundaries doesn't necessarily just mean like ghosting someone because they did something that, annoyed you, right? Or did something that maybe was like hard for you to hear. boundaries isn't necessarily even about controlling other people and what they do or say. We like to reframe boundaries to be more about, it's kind of like standards that you have for yourself versus the other person. So first step is to figure out, what are your values? What is important to you? What are some of the goals that you want to accomplish in your life? And then informed with that information, you could figure out, okay, what kind of relationships do I want to have? Where do I want to put my energy? When are things not okay or healthy for me? And with that state of mind, it could help you figure out, okay, what are the relationships in my life that are really hurtful or harmful to me? In some cases, maybe even just really draining. And what do I need to do in order to protect myself and my health and mental health? And so when it comes to boundaries, it's more about like, okay, at what point do I need to excuse myself from a conversation? Or how frequently do I feel capable and comfortable to talk to a certain individual, or at what capacity, so maybe some people are cool one-on-one, and then other people are like more of a group-based kind of relationship where you need a little bit more buffer between you and the other person. So it really does take some customizing, which is where health and wellness coaches and therapists, psychologists could come in and help you kind of navigate like what's right for you.
Well, it imagines that it sounds like knowing yourself is a key component of that, and that it might be hard to set those boundaries when you have a hard time figuring out what you may need.
Yeah.
Aside from going to a therapist, which obviously could be a really good approach, are there any ways you could think to help people understand how do you get in tune with yourself in order to start recognizing where you may be able to set a boundary, where you may need to set a boundary?
Yeah, and that's where mindfulness comes into play. Mindfulness is the practice of just being really aware, both of your environment, of your mind, your body, your thoughts, your emotions, in the present moment at any given moment. And so the more we can be really mindful about how we're feeling and what we're thinking, the more awareness we could have about how we might be in a relationship, or how a relationship might be impacting us. And then with that awareness, you kind of think about like, okay, well, why am I thinking or feeling this way? Is it really the other person, or is it something that the other person is just representing or maybe triggering in me from something else? Maybe I'm just projecting. So starting off with mindfulness is a really good place to help raise that awareness of, what kind of boundaries you might need to start setting up for yourself in relationship to others.
Well, and it sounds like, I'm glad you mentioned this at the beginning, that relationships aren't just about romantic relationships, because often that can get the most attention, but it's also about your work and your friends and your family and all of these other areas. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about the impact that having that same mindfulness for those other relationships can have on your life too.
Yes. So, across the board, we understand that mindfulness helps in a number of ways. There's a lot of really strong research that's out now that shows people who practice mindfulness are able to, or have lower levels of stress, or better able to manage any kind of stressors, are able to cope with any symptoms of depression or anxiety. They even have done research with people who are recovering from cancer, those who have some kind of mindfulness practice versus those who don't. And the ones who do, of course, are healthier. We even look at mindfulness as far as eating disorders. And so there's an evidence-based practice, mindful eating, which helps people have healthier relationships with their mind, body, and eating practices. So it's pretty amazing to start looking into mindfulness, see if you could even find it on like certain health apps, and to start building that practice is going to have a really holistic health benefits for you, both in relationships and then in all of the other areas of your wellness as well.
I can imagine communication is key in all of this too. Not only if you're developing these boundaries and you're learning more about yourself, then how are you communicating about that to the people that you're engaging with, whether or not they're our partners or whether they're colleagues or family members. You talk a little bit about communication. How do we get better at it, and what its impact is?
Yes. I'm so glad you bring that part up, because awareness is the first step, right? And then figuring out what you want is the next step. And then it's like, okay, now how do I actually get what I want or communicate what I want or need? And that is a lifelong journey. That's I'll tell you. So even like as a trained professional who's been studying and practicing this for like over 13 years, I'm not going to be at 110% effective at communicating every single time, no matter what. Mindfulness is a good place to start, because if you're self-aware to recognize like, okay, I have a lot of external stressors going on right now, I might not be at my best or most effective in communicating. Or maybe I need to proceed with caution, because it's important to not just know what to say, but to know how and when to say it, and to be self-aware enough to recognize when is a good time to talk, or when you need to like take a break. So there's a lot of different actually really effective models for interpersonal effectiveness, all of which is around communicating. And one from dialectical behavioral therapy is called, the acronym is Dear Man, and each letter represents something. The D stands for describe. So you're going to describe whatever the situation is you need to talk about in your relationship. The E is to express, and that's where your actual thoughts, maybe assumptions or emotions to that fact-based situation, that's where you bring that in under E. The A is to assert yourself or express like what your ask is of the other person. And then the R is to reinforce whatever that is. So Dear Man is describe, express, assert, and reinforce. And you also have to include the part that spells out man, which is M for mindfulness. You want to stay mindful throughout the whole conversation you're having. The A is to appear confident. So especially if you're requesting something from like a boss or someone in power, to try to like watch how quickly you're talking, watch your tone, watch your body and posture. And then the N, notice, is at the very end. That means that's when you get to negotiate. So keep in mind what your ask is of the other person or of the relationship, and then have some wiggle room there at the end to say like, okay, where can I be flexible, and where is my boundary where I'm like, absolutely no, I'm not going there. So that's the Dear Man model helps us communicate effectively in interpersonal relationships.
How do you know when a relationship is no longer serving you?
When to know when a relationship is no longer serving you is, again, takes that mindfulness approach. And another piece that I would throw into that is another evidence-based practice called acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. And part of that philosophy is radical acceptance. And what we mean by acceptance isn't that you agree with everything. It's just that you accept reality for what it is. So as soon as you mindfully accept whatever the situation is, whoever this other person is in relationship with you, who they are, what they say they value, what their behaviors show that they value, how they treat you, how they treat others, what their goals are, whether or not you're compatible. As soon as you learn to like mindfully observe and then accept what they're showing you, then you can move to the next stage of like, okay, does that work for me? And that's really hard for a lot of people, because especially in relationships, we're so hopeful and we want them to work. And we many times try to fit people into this box that we need filled. And that's very natural to do. And with that said, looking through a very clear lens of like, okay, what is this relationship and how is it impacting me? How are we compatible? And then going on from there, accepting who this person is versus who you want them to be or who they used to be in the first 3 months you were dating. The dreams you put on them, whatever it is, try to clean that off and then just see them for reality. And that could help you recognize whether or not the relationship is serving you.
Ooh, that's hard work.
Yeah, it is. That's why it's helpful to it's really helpful to have some like unbiased, really supportive person there on your side to help you kind of navigate all of this stuff.
Yeah. I can imagine that would be super useful. It makes me think about, how do you actually know what love is?
Yeah.
Yeah. What the heck is love?
No one knows. No, I'm just kidding.
But you're an expert. You're supposed to know these things. Come on. I need you to solve this for us.
Well, the cool thing about being an expert is that like, if you're a true expert, you know that you're always learning, right? Versus if you're a fake expert, then you're like, oh my God, I'm like all knowing. Love can take very different forms. So it depends on the way you're talking about it. We have different understandings of love culturally, neurologically, psychologically, attachment style. I mean, so it's really complex. So depending on how you're looking at love and examining it, and even just your upbringing and culture. I mean, it could mean so many different things to so many different people. And our role in psychology isn't necessarily to tell you like what you have to believe, but to kind of pull back the layers of, what you do believe and what you do value. And is this concept or definition of love that you probably learned from observing role models and caregivers and messages you received growing up, and even messages you're still receiving from like society, whatever this concept of love is that serving you and is that healthy for you? And really kind of just trying to define it for yourself, helping people understand what love means to them. So that's where we come in.
Yeah. Oh, that's so helpful. This is really exciting for me. It's given me a lot to think about, and I hope the community to think about as well. I'm really thrilled that you could spend a little time with us to help us unpack a bit about relationships. If there is one thing that you would leave our community with to think about when it comes to improving their relationships, what would you suggest?
Some tips for the community, I would say, is to keep on learning. These concepts around love and relationships, what's healthy, what's not. A lot of it is just, for a lot of us, is restricted to just what we've been exposed to. And sometimes that isn't necessarily like the healthiest thing. Sometimes it doesn't really serve us very well. So keep on reading and learning and expand your social circles and meet new people and try to learn and understand other cultures and just expand your worldview to get other ideas and interpretations and to evolve in your relationships.
Oh, that's great. Do you mind letting folks know how they could get in touch with you or find you?
Oh, so many different ways. Witandreason.com is a website to our coaching and telehealth practice. I'm also on every social media thing ever at Dr. Alexis Moreno.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for spending the time with us. And again, this has been the Care for Creatives conversation series, and you can find out more about Care for Creatives on our website at creativeaffairsdc.com. Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Alexis.
Thank you.